Hi there, Power Systems engineers. Now, last video we talked about making a full Newton-Raphson solution in Python instead of inside PSSE. And during that example, I showed how to use keyword arguments inside the function. So if you see here, inside my FNSL function, I've used the words options1 equals 0 and options5 equals 0 to turn off transformer taps and disable switch shunt adjustments. Now you might be more familiar with the alternate form of calling a function with the underscore i's in it. So I'm going to show you both ways of calling a function and how I knew to write the words options1 and options5 based on the documentation. So let's just dive straight in. You might be more familiar with the underscore I default arguments that PSSE provides. So when you run, you record a macro in PSSE and record it to a Python file, you might find something that looks like this. So from PSSE import. So I'm just going to import the default integer, which is underscore I. It's part of the PSSPY package. You might be more familiar with something like this. For the full Newton-Raphson solution, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now this is equivalent to the one above. So option 1 is set to 0 and option 5 here is set to 0. However, then you need to fill in the intermediate options, so 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 and 8 with these default integer, which PSSE takes to mean don't set this option, leave it as the default. Now this is the output that you'll get when you run the macro in PSSE. It'll record it and it would look something like this. It gets actually quite long for other methods, so this is quite short, there's only 8 of them. I've seen ones with up to 20 or more. So what I do is I replace this list of integer arguments with just 2 keyword arguments for the ones I actually want to change. And the reason I do that is because it's easier for me to read later on. I can go in, I can see, oh yes, I'm only changing option 1 and 5, which is transformer steps and disabling switch shunt adjustment. So the only reason I'm doing this is because I think that later on, for me at least, it's easier to read. And that's the most important thing. I want my code to be easy to read later on, rather than easier for me to write right now. So I'll show you how I have looked up the documentation to find how to do each of these things and why is it called options and not something else. So the way I find the documentation is inside PSSE 32. I just go to the help menu, and on help topics there's a PDF, and there's a line here called Application Program Interface, or the API, which is the Python connection to PSSE. Now if I look inside the menu here on the side and I go down to FNSL, this is the definition of that function in the documentation. So I can see here the Python syntax, FNSL, and it's given me a named argument here called options. Now unique to PSSE is that, options here is just a list, as you saw earlier. It's this list of 8 integers. So this is options right now, so I could have written options equals and given it the list. But seeing as it's the first argument and only argument, I guess, in the function, I've omitted the keyword and just listed it in argument form. So the first I've given it an entire list, which is the first argument. Now the reason I knew to call it options 1 and options 5 is unique to PSSE. They have enabled you to give keyword arguments which correspond to each of the elements in the array. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. Each one of these, options 1 through to the bottom, options 8, can be addressed individually. And so the way you would write that is, Python keyword arguments can't have brackets. So the way I'd write it is options 1, all lowercase, even though they've written uppercase here. So options 1 corresponds to the tap adjustment flag, and it tells you what 0, 1 and 2 mean. So here I've called it options 1. So you can see how I got that from here, options 1. So options 1 is the tap transformer tapping, and I've turned them off or disabled them, which is the 0 option. The default is 1, which is enable stepping adjustment. And there is another option, which is option 2. So if I wanted to have option 2, I could just replace that 0 with a 2. And I'd have to update this comment here because I'm clearly not turning off transformer taps, but let's leave it back to where it was. And now options 5. Here is the switch shunt adjustment flag, and here I've called it out. I'm disabling the switch shunt adjustment flag, so I've set it to 0, and you can see here 0 is disabled, so options 5. So you notice that the options start at 1, they don't start at 0, whereas in Python most indexing starts at 0. They've named their options starting at 1. So 1 is the first option in this case. I'll just show one more function here, and it's the machine data changing function. So if we head back up to the top and we go to power data flow changing, and let's change the machine data to. Now this function has 4 arguments, and this one here, integer, and this one here, real AR, are lists of arguments similar to the options one, but this one they're not called options, it's called integer, and this one is called real AR. So here, integer you can see is an array of 6 elements, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and if I was to want to change the machine status, I might do integer 1 equals 0 to turn off the machine status, where it is 1 by default. So that's just another example of how it's not always called options. It depends on the function. So these integer ones are generally integers, and the real AR ones are generally floating point numbers. And here we've got 17 different floating point numbers that we can change, like the machine base. So I would use a real AR7, or lowercase, equals my machine base. So that's how I found the keyword arguments for the 4 Newton-Raphson solution function. If you have any questions about that, just feel free to give me an email or jump onto psspy.org. Look out for some more videos. We've got some more tips coming up on how you can use Python and PSSE together.